ChatGPT said, in the marble hall of the royal embassy. Morning light spilled through tall windows and danced on polished floors. Captain Amir Khan stood at rigid attention beside the grand entrance. He wore the crisp, dark uniform of the Royal Guard, its gold braids shining against the deep blue fabric. Every crease of his trousers was perfect, every button polished. He felt both pride and calm in his posture. Years of training had taught him to move with precision and grace, and now he stood ready to serve and protect the guests of his sovereign. Outside, a motorcade rumbled down the avenue. The visiting foreign officer, Major Thomas Reed, sat in the back seat with aides beside him. They passed through security checkpoints quickly, for Reed's title and rank cleared the way. He glanced at the embassy's ornate facade, its crest etched in stone, and straightened his tie. He did not yet know the strict customs he would face inside. To him, a salute meant one particular gesture, familiar from his own military drills. He had never imagined that another nation might do it differently. When the motorcade doors opened, Reed stepped out and surveyed the entrance hall. Diplomats and ambassadors in formal dress stood in neat rows. There were flags from many lands. Some he recognized, others he did not. In front of them all, standing like a statue at ease, was Amir Khan. Reed paused for a moment, waiting for the guard to acknowledge him. In Reed's world, a guard always recognized an officer above him, especially in uniform. Amir's dark eyes met Reed's as the foreign officer approached. He inclined his head in a small, respectful nod, following the custom that symbolized deep honor in his kingdom. It was a silent greeting, older than any written law, passed down through generations of royal guards. Amir knew this nod spoke more than words. It said, "I serve my king first, but I welcome you." It said, "I know my duty." Reed took a step forward. "Salute," he said, voice steady. He raised his right hand in the style he knew, fingers together, palm facing down, thumb along the seam of his trousers. He expected Amir to mirror him. It was standard practice where he came from. A guard on duty should prove his respect by offering the same salute. Reed had never questioned it before. He did not realize that commands which seemed ordinary at home could feel insulting abroad. A hush settled in the hall. Diplomats turned their heads to watch. The king's ambassador, Lady Elena Voss, frowned. She valued smooth diplomacy and feared confusion. Reed glanced at her, did not sense disapproval yet. He saw only polite curiosity on her face. Still, he repeated the word, firmer this time. "Salute, Captain." His training told him to obey orders, but his loyalty to the royal household told him something else. He was bound by oath to follow the royal code before any foreign officer's directive. To bow slowly, with hand over heart, was the salute. His king had taught him that a gesture said respect and humility, preserving the dignity of his monarch. Amir breathed in slowly, measured his emotions, and decided to honor both his duty and his heritage. He raised his right hand, fingers gently pressed together, but instead of bringing it to a rigid position at his temple, he placed it above his heart. Then he bent at the waist, bowing deeply until his eyes nearly met the floor. It was a motion so fluid and precise that it spoke of a silent ritual reaching back centuries. The gold braid on his uniform swept in a graceful arc. The echo of his boots on the marble floor felt louder than before. In that bowed moment, the embassy hall held its breath. Red stared at Amir, astonished. His face grew red, but he did not lower his hand. He had never seen such a response. His aides exchanged glances. Some shifted uncomfortably. The chamberlain tapped his pen against a leather pad, gathering his thoughts. Lady Voss moved closer, ready to step forward, but paused, uncertain of how to explain the moment. Amir straightened, keeping his hand at his heart until Reed withdrew his arm. Then, without a word, Amir clicked his heels and assumed perfect attention once more. His expression was calm, almost serene. He bowed again slightly, this time with only a hint of tilt, acknowledging that the exchange was complete. He had shown respect in his own way. Reed let his arm fall. He looked around the room, seeing whispers cross familiar faces. He felt a sting of irritation, but also a twinge of respect. He had challenged a guardian of custom, and that guardian had answered on his own terms. Reed realized he had stepped into a world where power and tradition balanced on delicate lines. He glanced at Lady Voss, who gave him a polite, almost sympathetic look. She would find the right words to smooth this over. At that moment, photographers pressed forward from behind velvet ropes. The bright flashes lit the scene in staccato bursts. Cameras clicked and whirred. Reports would say a guard had defied an order. They would speak of a brave act of cultural pride. Some would call it stubbornness or insubordination. But none would capture the quiet dignity in Amir's eyes or the steady grace of his salute. Reed cleared his throat. "Thank you," he said, voice measured. It was halfway between an order and an acceptance. He used the language of diplomacy, offering an olive branch. People relaxed slightly, and someone signaled the aides to take their positions. The ceremony would continue, with speeches and the raising of flags. But the first moments of the reception had changed. Inside his mind, Amir felt both relief and a quiet pride. He knew the officers who trained him had watched. He felt the weight of history in every movement he made. He had remained true to his oath, preserving the traditions that gave his uniform meaning. Yet he had not turned away the stranger. He had greeted him in the only way he could. That greeting had shaken the hall, but it had also opened a door. Outside, the motorcade waited. The visiting officer and his aides would pass through the hall soon. Later, they would talk of protocol and training, of manuals and standards. Would plan cultural workshops and briefings so no future officer would make the same mistake. They would say they learned something important. Respect is not a single gesture, but a willingness to understand. But in that marble hall, it was Captain Amir Khan's silent bow that spoke the loudest. It told of a royal code older than any modern instruction. It reminded everyone present that in a world of orders and ranks, tradition could stand firm like an unyielding oak. And that sometimes a simple bow could say more than a rigid salute ever could. After the surprising salute, the guests moved into the main reception room. The walls were lined with portraits of past ambassadors and grand tapestries showing ancient battles and peace treaties. A soft hush spread across the room as people waited for the formal speeches to begin. Captain Amir Khan followed protocol and stayed at his post near the doorway. His mind still replayed the moment he bowed. He could feel the weight of every eye upon him, some curious, some critical, and some admiring. Inside the reception room, the foreign officer, Major Thomas Reed, stood beside Lady Elena Voss, the ambassador. Reed cleared his throat before the assembled diplomats. He spoke in measured tones about friendship between nations and the importance of shared values. He praised the host country's rich history and its careful traditions. As he spoke, Red watched Amir from the corner of his eye. He wondered what thoughts crossed Amir's calm face. Amir listened to Reed's words. The sound of the foreign tongue felt different here, echoing off the high ceilings. He felt respect for Reed's genuine intention to build bridges between their lands. Behind Reed's polished speech, Amir sensed humility. He could see Reed's eyes soften when he glanced their way. Reed was learning, even if he did not say so. Amir stood tall, chest steady, absorbing every word with the same precision he used in his bow. After Reed finished, Lady Voss stepped forward. She spoke softly but clearly, weaving English and the host country's language. She explained the bow gesture for those unfamiliar, speaking of its meaning in their culture, honor, humility, and loyalty. She asked for understanding and patience as they learned each other's ways. Her voice was warm, and some diplomats relaxed with smiles of recognition. They nodded and whispered among themselves, their tension easing.
Yes.
Lady Voss spoke. Amir felt a quiet satisfaction. His simple gesture had sparked a conversation about culture and respect. He saw that some guests were writing notes, perhaps to brief future visitors. Others raised their phones, recording the moment, which spread fast in diplomatic circles. Amir's heart beat steadily as he realized he had done more than follow tradition. He had protected its meaning. After speeches, guests moved to the buffet tables. The spread was lavish, finger sandwiches with delicate fillings, fruit platters arranged like colorful mosaics, and small cups of sweet custard. Tiers of mini pastries stood on silver stands. The scent of fresh bread and brewed tea mingled in. The air, Servants in crisp white jackets offered refreshments. Amir watched as diplomats approached, some offering gentle smiles, others offering polite bows or nods. A guest from a distant country approached Amir. He was a colonel from Africa, dressed in a bright uniform of emerald green and gold. He extended his hand and spoke in a gentle voice. That was a beautiful bow. You showed respect to your king and to the guest. Amir nodded and responded with a small bow of his own, placing his hand over his heart. The colonel smiled widely and moved on, speaking to colleagues about what he had seen. Meanwhile, Major Reed stepped away from the buffet. He looked lost among the crowd, still uncertain how to carry himself. Lady Voss noticed and joined him. It was a bold move, she said quietly. But it is our way. Shows who we are. Reed drank a cup of tea and nodded slowly. I admit, I felt challenged, he said. I have always believed that respect is shown in one way, the salute. But now I see there is more than one way. I want to learn. Lady Voss placed a comforting hand on his arm. Your willingness to learn matters more than any salute, she told him. In diplomacy, understanding often counts more than protocol. Reed set down his cup and took a deep breath. I will remember this day, he said, not because I felt slighted, but because I learned something new. Meanwhile, back by the doorway, Amir remained vigilant. He noticed a group of journalists who had slipped past the velvet rope. They whispered and took photos. He recognized one lady who wrote for a major newspaper. She pointed her camera at him and tapped on her tablet. He stood still, confident that his actions would be explained. Soon. When the speeches ended, guests began to leave the reception room. Some headed to the gardens for a walk. Others went to the library for tea. The gardens were full of neat hedges, marble fountains, and creeping ivy on stone walls. Soft sunlight filtered through the trees. In one corner, a gardener swept fallen petals into a neat pile. In the library, leather-bound books lined tall shelves. Lamps cast a warm glow on the reading tables. Amir felt the ceremony was over, but sensed his duty continued. He walked with soft steps behind the departing guests, ready to respond if needed. He knew the next moments would shape how people remembered today. His salute had challenged assumptions. Kindness and calm could reinforce respect. Later, as the sun dipped toward evening, Reed and Lady Voss stood on a balcony overlooking the gardens. Reed looked at the distant mountains beyond the hedges, spoke quietly. I was wrong to demand a salute before learning your way. I have spent decades studying military traditions, but this taught me more than any book. Lady Voss smiled and nodded. We all learn, Major. Culture is living and breathing. It changes with each person who honors it. In the far corner of the embassy, Amir removed his ceremonial jacket. He was off duty, but his mind still hummed with the day's events. A fellow guard, Lieutenant Sophia Perez, approached him with 2 small bottles of mineral water. She smiled and said, Well done, Captain. You kept your oath and still showed respect. Amir accepted the water gratefully and replied, Thank you, Sophia. We serve more than orders. We serve our people and our king. They walked together through the corridor, their footsteps echoing softly. The corridor walls were painted in pale cream with red carpets at their feet. Portraits of former guards in uniform hung between doors. Each painting told its own story of duty and honor. Amir and Sophia paused briefly before one portrait, showing a guard who once saved a visiting dignitary from harm. Sophia pointed and said, He too had to make a hard choice. He chose loyalty and courage. Amir nodded, feeling the connection. Through time, that night, in his quarters, Amir sat at a small wooden desk. He opened a leather journal and wrote a few lines about the day. He described the foreign officer's demand, his own response, and the reactions of those present. He wrote honestly about his pride and his doubts. He closed the journal and placed it on a shelf beside letters of commendation and medals. His uniform lay on a chair, still pressed but ready for tomorrow. Outside, a light rain began to fall. Soft patters tapped on the embassy windows. The gardens turned fresh, the hedges shining with droplets. The marble paths glistened like mirrors. Inside, the library lamps had been dimmed, and only the glow of candles remained. Diplomats who stayed late whispered softly in the corners. A few guards patrolled the corridors, keeping watch as night settled. In the darkness, Amir felt a sense of peace. He had honored his king and welcomed his guest. He had shown that respect can be more than a single gesture, more than a rule in a manual. 8. It was a feeling in the heart and a promise in the soul. He thought of the foreign officer, standing on the balcony and looking at the mountains. He trusted that Reed would carry this lesson back to his homeland. As the clock struck 10, Amir turned off his lamp. The embassy halls quieted further, and only the sound of rain stayed. He lay down to sleep, his mind at ease. Tomorrow would bring more duties, more ceremonies, perhaps more visitors. But he knew he would meet them with the same calm resolve. He would honor his oath, his king, and his culture, and in doing so, help others see the beauty in their traditions. And so, in that grand royal embassy, under rain and night, a single bow had become more than a gesture. It had become a bridge between worlds. It reminded everyone present that real respect goes beyond orders. It is felt in the heart, shown in the eyes, and carried forward in understanding. In the quiet of his quarters, Captain Amir Khan slept, proud to guard not only the embassy gates, but also the silent promise of respect he had shared with the world. Amir woke early the next morning before the sun climbed above the embassy rooftops. He dressed in his service uniform again, crisp and neat, and stepped out into the corridor. The hush of the building at dawn felt different from daytime bustle. Guards paused in their routines to nod at him as he passed. In their quiet way, they showed respect for what had happened and for the confidence he carried. Amir slowed his steps, remembering the day before, the salute, the bow, the whispered surprises in the reception hall. He entered the ambassador's office where Lady Elena Voss waited at her desk. She smiled when she saw Amir, sunlight through. A tall window lit the room, and cups of tea sat on a silver tray. "Good morning, Captain," she said softly. "Thank you for coming." Amir bowed his head slightly, placing a hand over his heart. "Good morning, Madam Ambassador."
Us.
"For me?" Lady Voss gestured to a chair. "Yes. I want to discuss something important." Amir sat, folding his hands in his lap. Lady Voss pointed to the desk's surface, where lay invitations and papers in neat piles. "The cultural training program begins today," she said. "Your experience matters most. Would you teach our visiting officers the meaning of your salute?" Amir's eyes widened. He had not expected to lead sessions, but he felt honored. "I will do my best," he replied. Lady Voss nodded. "We start in an hour. I have sent word to military attaches from many countries. They will attend." Amir stood, his heart steady, but his mind alert. He had taught drills before, but never this lesson. In the training room, rows of chairs faced a dais with a long table. Flags of allied nations stood behind it. Officers in uniform filled chairs, some from Europe, some from Asia and Africa, others from the Americas. Their faces held polite curiosity. At the front, Lady Voss introduced Amir. She spoke of diplomacy, respect, and the power of simple gestures. Then she stepped aside, and all eyes turned to Amir Khan, the royal guard. Amir cleared his throat and began. He spoke in simple English, his accent soft but clear. He told the group about his oath to the king, the history of the bow, and what it meant in his nation. He explained that placing the hand over the heart showed loyalty, and bending at the waist showed humility before the sovereign and the guest. He described how every movement held meaning, how the position of the feet and the gaze spoke without words. The officers listened closely, some taking notes, others simply watching. Then Amir demonstrated. He stood tall, feet together, hand over heart, and bent at the waist until his chest was nearly parallel to the floor. The room was silent. When he straightened, he held the position a moment longer. Then he lowered his hand and assumed attention. He felt the officers studying him, trying to copy the move. He walked among them, showing the right angle of bend, the steady gaze, and the gentle placement of the hand. Officers practiced on one another, awkward at first, but improving as Amir guided them. After the demonstration, one colonel from South America raised his hand. "Captain, may I ask?" he said. "Yesterday I gave my own salute to you, but you bowed. I felt uneasy. Now, I see you did not reject my greeting. You answered in your way. It was beautiful." Amir nodded. "Thank you. I did not mean to refuse." "Respect. I only wished to show respect in a way true to me." The colonel smiled and bowed himself, practicing the motion. Others followed, smiles spreading across their faces. The tension of yesterday's confusion melted into shared understanding. By mid-morning, the training session ended. Officers gave Amir polite applause and asked questions. "Where did you learn this? How long does it take to master? Would it be acceptable in their own ceremonies?" Amir answered kindly, explaining that culture cannot simply be moved from one place to another. It grows in the soil where it began. But learning to honor others, even by adopting small gestures, can build bridges. He encouraged them to ask their own people about their customs, so they could share them abroad. Meanwhile, in the press room downstairs, journalists prepared their stories. Reporters from newspapers and television crews gathered around monitors. They replayed the footage of Amir's bow and the foreign officer's surprise. Some stories framed it as a minor diplomatic spat, others as a victory for cultural pride. One reporter said on camera, "We saw a guard stand his ground against an order, but then teach the world why tradition matters." A producer nodded, and the clip went to air. Soon, audiences in many countries would tune in to learn of the Royal Guard's salute. Back in the embassy, Amir returned to his normal rounds. He walked corridors, checked gates, and greeted staff. Some of the more junior guards fell silent as he passed, remembering how he had shown courage and grace. Felt a warm sense of pride, but he kept his steps measured. His duty had taught him that pride must never become arrogance. He remained alert and humble. His mind still replayed the faces of officers trying the bow, their eyes bright with discovery. In the afternoon, Major Thomas Reed asked for a private meeting. Reed waited in a small anteroom off the ambassador's office. When Amir entered, Reed rose and offered a firm handshake. "Captain Khan," he said. "May I call you Amir?" Amir hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, Major Reed." Reed smiled. "I owe you an apology and thanks. Yesterday, I did not understand. I spoke without knowledge. It was wrong of me to command you without learning your way." Amir inclined his head. "I understand, sir. It was a moment for both of us to learn." Reed nodded and continued. "Your teaching helped many officers today. They saw what respect means when you stand by your culture. I hope you know your actions made us all better." Amir accepted Reed's words with a quiet smile. He felt relief that the foreign officer understood. "Thank you, Major. We serve to protect and to learn from one another." Reed extended his hand again, and Amir shook it. "Ah! If ever you need help understanding our customs, call on me," Reed said. Amir bowed lightly, placing his hand on his heart. "I would be honored, sir." Later that day, Amir visited the embassy library. He picked up a book on world diplomacy and read a chapter on protocol. It described many gestures, handshakes, waves, salutes. It spoke of how a simple nod can bridge language barriers. Amir read the lines carefully, imagining officers around the world learning from each other. He thought of the day's lessons and the promise of more understanding. As evening approached, the embassy hosted a small dinner for visiting officers. Tables were set with white linen and lit by candles. Soft music played in the corner. Amir mingled among guests, serving wine and offering small bites of local cuisine. He saw familiar faces from the morning's training, the African colonel, the South American officer, and others. They greeted him warmly, sometimes bowing or offering a nod. Amir bowed back in kind, his hand gently on his heart. Major Reed sat at the head table with Lady Voss. He caught Amir's eye and gave him a small nod. Reed raised his glass in a silent toast, and Amir returned the gesture. It was not a formal salute, but a sign of gratitude and friendship. The guests clinked glasses, and the warm glow of candlelight filled the room. Conversations drifted from Protocol 2, personal stories, tales of home, memories of family, hopes for peace. Amir listened and smiled. He felt the walls between nations growing thinner. After the dinner, Amir walked out into the cool night air. The gardens glowed under soft lamps. Fountains murmured in the darkness. He paused by a hedge shaped like a lion, the symbol of his kingdom's strength. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, smelling jasmine in the air. He thought of the day's journey, from a surprise salute to a shared lesson in respect. He felt tired but fulfilled. That night, back in his quarters, Amir wrote again in his journal, recorded Major Reed's apology, the questions from the officers, and the warmth of the dinner. He reflected on how a simple act had sparked change. He noted that respect is not fixed in one form but lives in the hearts of people willing to learn. He closed the journal and looked at the small frame on his desk, a photograph of his late father in the same uniform. His father had taught him the value of tradition. Amir whispered a quiet thanks and turned off the lamp. As he drifted to sleep, Amir dreamed of flags waving together, of salutes in many forms, and of people bowing to learn. He thought of the embassy's grand halls and the quiet moments in training rooms. He saw Major Reed, Lady Voss, and the officers practicing the bow. He felt hope that each gesture of respect, no matter how small, could bring nations closer. In his dream, the world was a place where customs met, bows met salutes, and understanding bloomed like flowers. And he, Captain Amir Khan, stood at the center, a guard of tradition and a teacher of respect. In the days after the training and dinner, the embassy settled back into its usual rhythm. Yet beneath the polished routines, something had shifted. Diplomats moved with a lighter step. Guards nodded to one another with warmer smiles, and whispers of the royal salute filled the corridors. Captain Amir Khan returned to his watch with renewed determination. He walked through the main hall each morning, checking the silver display cases and straightening crests on the walls. He exchanged nods with Lieutenant Sofia Perez, who gave him a thumbs up from across the hall before returning to her own duties. News of the salute and the training session rippled through the diplomatic community. Articles appeared in local newspapers praising the Royal Guard's graceful bow and calling it a triumph of cultural pride. Foreign news agencies ran features about the lesson in respect, interviewing military attaches who had attended the session. Some stories framed the event as a minor scandal. Guard defies order, but most highlighted the positive message: mutual understanding. Amir read a few clippings sent by the ambassador's office. He folded them carefully into his journal, letting the words remind him of the power of a single gesture. Meanwhile, ambassadors from neighboring countries requested their own sessions. They asked Lady Voss to arrange private demonstrations of the royal salute. Amir's schedule filled quickly. He led classes in sunlit drawing rooms in the libraries, high-walled alcoves, and even in the garden pavilion under vine-covered beams. Each time, he greeted the group with a small nod, placed his hand on his heart, and bowed as he had before.
Oh.
Officers and diplomats practiced in lines, some stumbling at first, then growing more confident as they learned the exact angle of the bend and the quiet firmness in the eyes. One afternoon, a delegation from the eastern mountains arrived. Their uniforms were dark green with silver trim. The lead officer, Colonel Anaya Wu, stepped forward and performed a slow bow in her own tradition, hand at forehead, then across the chest. She then watched Amir's bow, studying the way his body moved. After his demonstration, she smiled and said, "We have our own bows, but I see the same respect in yours. I would like to learn it." They exchanged bows, and the others in her group followed. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floor, marking each movement as sacred. Back in the press office, journalists prepared a special report on the growing interest in cultural training at the embassy. They highlighted how one guard's quiet stand had taught many officers a lesson in humility. A television crew requested to film Amir teaching. Lady Voss agreed, but under one condition: no cameras in the actual guard room or near private quarters. They could film only in the public training hall. On the appointed day, Amir stood at the front under soft lights. A cameraman captured his every motion as he bowed, and a reporter asked him questions about what respect meant to him. Amir answered calmly, explaining that respect is a living tradition that grows when people share their culture. That evening, the television segment aired. Viewers saw the steady, graceful bow and heard Amir's words about loyalty and humility. Callers phoned into the talk show, praising the guards' courage and thanking the embassy for teaching everyone so much. Some viewers said they would try the bow themselves as a sign of respect to elders and neighbors. Others said they wished their own nations had similar traditions. Mir watched a recording in the officers' lounge, seated among fellow guards and embassy staff. When the segment ended, the room filled with applause. Mir smiled and nodded, feeling both pride and a quiet resolve to honor his duties. Outside the embassy gates, street vendors sold commemorative postcards showing an illustration of a guard's bow. Some sold small pins shaped like hands over hearts. Tourists bought them along with local snacks and souvenirs. In a nearby cafe, a barista drew a tiny bow in the foam of a customer's tea. The story of the royal salute had become part of the city's conversation. People who knew nothing of diplomatic protocols still spoke of respect in simple terms. Bow with the heart. Amir heard these stories secondhand from staff and visitors. He realized that his kingdom's tradition had touched more lives than he ever imagined. Not all reactions were positive. A few critics argued that customs should not hinder efficiency. They wrote that soldiers and guards must obey orders quickly, without hesitation. Some said cultural pride should not interfere with clear command. Lady Voss read these opinions carefully and wrote letters to newspaper editors explaining that respect and obedience can coexist. She reminded readers that the guard's bow did not break discipline. It expanded understanding. Discipline, she wrote, includes knowing why one follows orders and recognizing that respect sometimes requires gentle patience. One rainy afternoon, Major Thomas Reed returned to the embassy for a follow-up meeting. He wore his uniform with neat pride. He found Amir waiting by the grand lobby, raincoat over his shoulders. Reed approached and offered an umbrella. "Thank you," Amir said, accepting it. They walked together toward the ambassador's office. Reed spoke of his homeland's plans to include a cultural training module in their military academies. He credited Amir's lesson for the change. "You have inspired us," Reed said. "We will teach cadets in our country about your bow and about understanding other traditions." Amir felt a warm rush of gratitude. "I am glad to help," he replied. "Respect grows when people listen and learn." Reed nodded. "Your actions reminded me that every salute, every bow is a promise of trust. We need more of that." When they reached the ambassador's office, Lady Voss greeted them both. She offered tea, and they sat by a window where raindrops traced patterns on the glass. Outside, the garden glistened in the soft light. The three shared stories of culture, duty, and respect, forging friendships that bridged continents. Evening, as the embassy settled into calm, Amir returned to his quarters. He moved quietly through the halls, passing portraits of past guards. Each painting felt alive with memory. He paused in front of one that showed a guard saluting a visiting queen. In that picture, the guard's face was calm, proud. Amir bowed softly to the portrait, remembering the lessons he had learned and taught. He realized then that traditions carry stories, and stories carry traditions. In his room, he prepared his ceremonial uniform for the next day's duties. He polished the gold braid once more and checked each button. As he worked, he thought of the countless women and men he had taught in the last week, their curious faces, their careful bows, their new understanding. He filled his mind with their names and their countries, imagining them returning across oceans with a new respect for his homeland. Before sleep, he wrote one final entry in his journal. He described how a single salute had blossomed into many. Bows how a simple act of honor could change hearts and minds. He noted the rainbows of cultures that met in the embassy halls. Above all, he reminded himself that respect is not commanded. It is earned through understanding and compassion. With those thoughts, he closed the journal, placed it on his bedside table, and lay down to rest. Outside, the rain fell gently, cleansing the marble steps and the hedges of the royal gardens. and at its heart, Captain Amir Khan slept peacefully, knowing he had upheld his oath to his king and had shown the world the true meaning of respect. In the quiet dawn of the final day before returning to normal routine, Amir rose early and walked through the empty halls of the embassy. The marble floors gleamed faintly under soft lights, and the portraits of past guards seemed to watch him. With knowing eyes, felt a gentle pride as he remembered all that had happened. The surprise salute, the lessons taught, and the friendships made. This last morning felt different, as if the building itself recognized how deeply respect had taken root within its walls. Amir dressed carefully in his formal guard uniform, taking extra time to polish each button and smooth every crease. He placed the gold braid on his shoulder just so, and checked the fit of his hat. As he prepared, he thought of the many officers who had bowed alongside him. He hoped that each one would carry a part of his culture back to their own countries and pass it on. By mid-morning, the ambassador called a small gathering in the garden pavilion. Flags of many nations stood side by side in a gentle breeze, and a low table held tea and light snacks. Lady Voss welcomed everyone with kind words, praising the spirit of unity that had grown here. She looked at Amir and spoke of his courage, his grace, and the way he had bridged worlds with a simple gesture. She asked the assembled officers and diplomats to raise their cups in honor of the royal salute. Major Reed lifted his cup and smiled. At Amir, he spoke of the importance of learning and humility, and how this embassy had set an example for all who served their nations. Others around the pavilion echoed Reed's words, offering warm cheers. The soft clink of cups felt like music, marking the end of one chapter and the promise of another. After the toast, Amir stood at the edge of the pavilion, watching his guests. Mingled, he saw the African colonel practicing the bow with a friend from Europe. He saw the South American officer showing a local aide how to place the hand over the heart. He saw smiles and polite laughter as people shared their own traditions alongside his. The air felt alive with shared respect, as if every breath carried a promise of understanding. As the crowd thinned, Reed approached Amir again. "I've drafted a proposal for my government's military academy," he said quietly. "I want to include a module on cultural respect, using your salute as the example. Will you allow me to use your name?" Amir nodded, touched by the request. "You may," he said. "Teach it well, and teach why it matters." Reed bowed, his head slightly, mirroring Amir's gesture. It was a silent agreement that would reach far beyond the embassy grounds. That afternoon, a small team from the embassy's cultural department met with Amir to plan a permanent program. They wanted to create a guidebook with photos and simple instructions, and a video of Amir demonstrating the bow. They asked him to share stories of past guards and to explain the values behind each movement. Amir agreed, knowing that his words could help others see the heart behind tradition. He spent hours with them, speaking in plain language about loyalty, humility, and honor. In the late afternoon sun, Amir took a moment alone in the garden by the fountain. Water spilled over marble tiers, and the gentle sound felt like a soft song. He closed his eyes and remembered his father's words. "A guard's true strength lies not in his weapon, but in his heart." Those words guided him now. He reached into his pocket and touched the small locket his father had given him. A simple gift with a picture of the king inside. Amir pressed it to his chest and bowed his head, honoring both his father and his sovereign. When evening fell, the embassy held a small farewell dinner for Amir, who was due to transfer to a new post soon. The tables were set under soft lantern, light in the courtyard, and the air smelled of jasmine and fresh bread. Lady Voss, Major Reed, and many officers spoke kind words. Some presented gifts: a framed photo of Amir bowing, a book of calligraphy with his favorite proverb, and a small sculpture of a heart encircled by two hands. Amir felt a warm glow in his chest as he accepted each gift. He thanked everyone in simple words, placing his hand over his heart and bowing his head in his own salute. The guests bowed back, and for a moment the courtyard was filled with silent respect. No words were needed. Each person understood the meaning behind the gesture. Later, as the dinner ended, Reed approached Amir one last time. "I have one more question," he said softly. Why did you choose to bow so deeply, even when it could have meant trouble? Amir considered the question carefully.
Look,
It reads Ernest's face and replied, I chose to honor what is oldest in me. A bow from the heart carries more weight than any order from above. It is a promise that I will always put respect first. Reed nodded, touched by the answer. That night, Amir returned to his quarters for the final time, laid his uniform on the bed, and sat at his desk by the window. He opened his journal and wrote the last entry. Reflections on change, lessons learned, and hopes for the future. He wrote of the many officers who had bowed with him, and of the ripples that respect had sent across the world. He closed the journal gently and placed it on his shelf beside the clippings and gifts he had collected. Before sleep, Amir stood by the window and looked out at the embassy gardens. The lanterns cast soft circles of light, and the hedges stood like silent guards in the dark. He took a deep breath and lifted his hand to his heart, bowing in the quiet of the night. It was his way of saying goodbye to this chapter and of promising to carry the lessons forward. He felt peace in his mind and pride in his duty. Sleep claimed him. Amir dreamed of open doors and long tables where people from all lands sat together. He dreamed of bows and salutes shared in harmony, of hearts joined by simple gestures. In his dream, the world was a place where understanding overcame orders and where every act of respect added to a global tapestry of kindness. When dawn broke again, Amir would leave for his new assignment. But the embassy and all who had passed through its halls would remain changed. In the weeks and months ahead, classes would continue, guidebooks would be printed, and distant academies would teach the royal salute. All because one guard chose to bow in silence and speak through his heart. And so, the story of a foreign officer's command and a royal guard's gentle reply came to its final part. It was a story of culture and courage, of learning and teaching, of a simple bow that shook an embassy and built bridges across nations. In the end, it showed that respect is not just a gesture, it is a living promise, carried by those brave enough to honor it.